Things aren't working like they ought to, particularly where work is concerned. We saw productivity fall in the 1970s, and since then it has remained quite disappointing by historical standards. Wage growth has been disappointing across many rich countries, especially since 2000. The share of national income across countries that goes to workers rather than owners of factories and owners of land has fallen. And then within the wage spectrum, there's been huge growth in inequality, especially in Anglo economies like Britain and America. These trends that we see on the economic side are reflected in worrying developments in some of our societies and in our politics. I think that the root of the problem is the new technology that we see all around us. There are economists out there, such as Robert Gordon, who looks around and says the problem with our society is not that things are changing too quickly, but too slowly. There's a different point of view that, in fact, the digital revolution is kind of quietly but powerfully improving in its capacity to do things. That we see the development of machine intelligence and the use of big data. The upshot of this improvement in technology is that things that we thought even a few years ago would take generations to occur are now happening before our eyes. And I come down squarely on the side of the optimist or the accelerationist, that technology is improving quite rapidly. But how do we square this with the dismal conditions for workers? And I think there are two big forces that help reconcile these two stories of dismal conditions for workers and rapidly accelerating technological change. The first is that there is increasingly a wealth of humans, an abundance of labor that is the result of improving technology. In some cases, it's leading to automation. In others, it is making highly skilled workers much more productive and allowing them to do things that used to take many more people to do. It's allowed companies like Apple to locate factories all over the world, track production in real time, and trade has grown very rapidly over the last 15 years. And hundreds of millions of low-wage workers in China and India have been able to join the labor force. The sort of outcome of all this is that we suddenly have a massive pool of labor that's available. That massive pool is creating significant problems. Now, there were some similar trends like this in the Industrial Revolution, but we had different and positive mechanisms available to us. In the early 19th century, most people couldn't read or write, so we could take those workers, teach them to read and write, and suddenly they were able to take much more productive jobs paying higher wages than they could do in their small town or on the farm. We could move them to massively growing cities where the factories were located, and in that way allow them to take advantage of the new opportunities. Now, we don't really have the ability to do those things to quite the same extent. In the rich world, about 90% of people complete a secondary degree. Nearly 50% of people complete a university degree, and it's much harder to substantially boost educational attainment. And in the same way, it's difficult to say to someone who's just lost a factory job, if you want a good living, you have to go retrain as a plumber, but by the way, you also have to move to London, and in the process pay 6 times what you're paying now in rent. The result is that the pressure of the abundance of labor has been felt in wages. Wages have been very low as workers have competed with each other to try to find new positions. Companies who suddenly find themselves faced with this ocean of people willing to work at low wages don't feel compelled to invest in new labor-saving technologies. The ironic effect of the digital revolution is low levels of productivity, low investment in capital, and lots of people working in disappointing low-wage jobs. There are things that we can think about that have worked in the past and that may work again in the future to try to defuse these conflicts that we see. One is to try to make the workers better. In the past, educating them, moving them to new cities. In the future, it may involve things like combining workers with new forms of technology in potentially weird-looking ways. There's certainly room to do more to educate workers, to help them develop the skills they need. But I think reasonably, we can't expect those mechanisms to work as they did in the past. That means that much more of the solution is going to have to come from redistribution. Public services that are provided directly to people, free child care or higher education. Social ownership of the means of production, that everyone gets a share of the companies that own the robots and then lives off the dividends. Or it can mean something like a universal basic income. There are a few problems with this, though. That these things don't fall out of the sky like manna from heaven. They have to be brought into existence by concerted political action. History suggests that it takes quite a long time to develop the consensus about what kinds of policies are needed and the political groups that are willing to fight for these things and that can demand that they happen. Some people who stand to benefit from it may nonetheless reject it because they don't want to live in a world where work is not playing the role that it plays now. If you think about a basic income, it solves the problem of putting food on people's table, which is a critical problem, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't fill the other roles that work plays in people's lives, such as providing structure, providing meaning, and a sense of control over one's life. People observe that you work and see that you're contributing to society in some way. You're not just sitting around. And then that entitles you to pull out of the social safety net. If we no longer have work playing that role, we need some other mechanism to decide who is entitled, who is allowed to participate in the redistributive schemes. Now, it's possible we'll invent something new, but it may also be that what we end up doing is something more pernicious, which is say, we're going to redistribute, but only to the people who look like us. And so my concern is that we will draw the lines ever more tightly and exclude more and more people. And then solution 3 is that we would pull up the ladder. And I think that's the sort of nastiest solution, the one that leads to the most conflict. It is not the case that everything works itself out magically. It's not the case that technology changes things and then suddenly and magically provides all the solutions. Instead, there's a long, long process of a social negotiation, and in which we find the levers of power that can be pulled to try to create better solutions. And unfortunately, politics is very difficult. This process takes a very long time. It requires new ideas, new ways of thinking, and it requires new institutions. So I'm sort of long-term positive about our ability to live in a great technological world with the digital technology we have available to us, but short-run pessimistic about how we're going to arrive there.